Hello, my name is Ian Contover, and this is the Current Buzz. Thank you for watching today. I have a gentleman here. His name is James Barron. He wrote a book called The Greek Connection, and I've been trying to get him on the show for quite some time. And it's about Watergate. It's about untold story of Watergate, and he's going to talk about the Greek connection in regards to how it influenced the Watergate and probably things that you haven't heard. I also have another book, All the President's Men, that was popular, in the 70s when it was written by a gentleman from the Washington Post. The Greek Connection, it says life of Demetrius Kalopoulos, right? Demetropoulos, I'm sorry. Untold story of the Watergate, that's what it says, okay, on the cover. Who the hell is Elias Demetropoulos that you have to write about him?
Elias Demetropoulos is a remarkable fellow. When people ask me about the book, I say it's a nonfiction political thriller about a controversial journalist who fought for democracy, honor, and survival against abuse of Greek and American governments trying to destroy him. He was
a reporter, right?
He was a journalist. He was a journalist, but it was much more than that. The interesting thing, his claim to fame, for some people who may know his story, is in 1968 he uncovered an illegal transfer of funds from the Greek CIA, from the junta that had taken over the democracy the year before, and getting those funds to the Nixon campaign because they thought Nixon would be more supportive of the Greek junta than would Humphrey. And so they wanted to influence the election. And it was that information he tried to get to the Democrats, who ended up not using it for a variety of reasons I explained in the book. Mm-hmm. But the information was still in their files. And it was one of the reasons for the Watergate break-in. It was one of the things they were looking for to find out what was the information the Democrats had on Nixon they hadn't used in 1968 that they might use in 1972. So part of the untold story of Watergate was that the break-in in 1972 all had its roots for what happened in 1968.
Okay. The Greek junta took over the government. The colonels, it was a colonel juntas. The colonels were not going to be ever promoted to general, so they took over the government. And they took over the government from 1967 to 1974.
Right. And
the Nixon administration looked away and said they didn't, publicly they said they didn't support the junta, but in actuality they did.
Well, for Cold War purposes, not only the Nixon administration, but the Johnson administration before supported the junta.
Okay. Oh, okay. This was during Johnson, Nixon. Yeah, okay. So the American government was basically more or less supportive of the junta.
Right.
Yeah, okay. All right. So Elias comes in, digs up this information as a journalist, and what happens?
Well, he basically escaped the junta in 1967, which is a whole other story, and then was a leading force against the junta from Washington, working with friends in Congress and others to do it. In 1968, when he brought the information to the Democrats, the information was valuable. They trusted the message, but they were afraid of the messenger because Elias had earlier, based on his being an independent reporter, alienated a number of Democrats and others in Washington where they were concerned that he had an interview in 1961 that came out just after Jack Kennedy became president. And it was from Arleigh Burke, who was the chief of naval operations under Eisenhower, was being kept over by Kennedy.
Admiral
Arleigh
Burke, okay.
And the interview was a very strong right-wing position of the Russians aren't going to push us around, and upset the Kennedy administration policies, and they thought that Burke had possibly violated the arrangements of not talking to the press in certain ways. The interview actually took place while Eisenhower was the president. and was published when Kennedy became president. But Pierre Salinger was furious with this breach, and there was information in his files for a period of years because he had angered both the Greeks and Americans. There were distorted information in his CIA files, his FBI files, and others, and they were afraid that it might be a trick in some way that he was bringing to the Democrats. They didn't want to use the information. Elias had said to them, look, I will set you up with sources in Washington, or go to Richard Helms, who has been the head of the CIA, who was appointed by Johnson, have him investigated and show them my information is correct. Or I will bring my sources here to the United States, and they will testify as to the truth of this information. But if I bring them here, you will have to provide living expenses for them because they won't be able to go home until the junta is gone. And Larry O'Brien, with the Democrats, ended up saying, no, they weren't going to use it, they weren't going to do it. But as I said, this was still in his files. And Stanley Cutler, the big Watergate historian, said the concern about the Greek money story in 1968 was one of the driving forces for the break-in in 72.
Right, yeah. I remember that, the break-in. Was I in college at the time? But I remember that. So who is Tom Pappas? How is he involved in this whole?
Tom Pappas is a very interesting character. He's local in the sense that he grew up in Boston in the North End, and then in Somerville, and moved to Belmont, and
nice neighborhood.
Nice neighborhood,
yeah.
And was well known in the greater Boston area for his philanthropy, for his generosity, for his tremendous support for the church. He had a family business that he grew and expanded into an import-export business in the food business. He became an industrialist involved in the development of Greece in the 1950s and 60s, a powerhouse as a Republican, and very celebrated. But there's also a dark side to the story.
All right, let's listen to the dark side.
He's much more complex. At the same time, people either loved him or hated him. And originally, I was going to do this book on Tom Pappas. And I thought it was very difficult. People, whether they loved him or hated him, they didn't want to be quoted. They didn't want to talk about things.
Even though he's deceased.
Even though he's deceased. And I got into his FBI files and his other files and found interesting things. I mean, maybe back up a bit. He was known as this great philanthropist with two very wonderful tricks. He was known as a 10%er. 10%er means he would pledge a certain amount, and then when the charity or others wanted the money, he would give them 10% of his pledge. But he will at least have been promoting the Chaz, and they would get something. And one of his business partners told an interesting story that another one of his tricks was to make, at some of these big events, he would take out a big check and wave it and say, I want to support this cause with $10,000 or $30,000 or $50,000, and would pressure others to donate monies.
Yeah.
And they would then donate to try to match or do this. And afterwards, as the charity was counting up its money, Pappas would go in and take back his check and say, I did this to help promote it. You got the money from the others.
Wow.
And he'd take the money back.
Wow.
But the part that disturbed me most, and this goes back to his FBI files, was that he was one of the leaders of the effort to help Greece during the Second World War. And he was this whole war relief effort, and he would speak beautifully on behalf of Greece and raise funds. And then he would skim off about 10% for his own political causes.
Wow.
And take that. And Pappas challenged the FBI regarding this report. They reinvestigated it in the FBI files, and they confirmed what the original report.
Wow. So he was involved with the junta?
He was involved.
And they called him the ambassador. Didn't they call him the ambassador?
They called the ambassador, but the ambassador story is a very funny story. Even in his New York Times obituary, they refer to him as the ambassador to Greece. And people here in Boston area always think of him as ambassador to Greece. He wasn't. He wanted to be ambassador to Greece at one time, but there were problems regarding his past, with his business past, involved with certain crooked activities with Suffolk Downs and other illegal activities that he had. And there was even some false information on him regarding a communist act that was completely untrue, but it was in his files, and that caused problems. But he was still pressuring Eisenhower to make him an ambassador. And so when there was a new president of Uruguay in the 1950s, they sent a delegation from the United States to go to the inauguration. And Tom Pappas was made head of the delegation and made an honorary ambassador to do that. And that was why, for the rest of his life, he was known as the ambassador.
I see.
But it was that role and not ambassador to Greece or anything else. Okay. It was the ambassador.
Now, they didn't usually, they didn't put nationals, Greek nationals as ambassador to Greece from the United States.
Well, that's a whole interesting story. Yeah. They didn't appoint Greek nationals. It was a tradition in the State Department not to do nationals to your own country of origin. Mm-hmm. But because Greek was considered to be a difficult language, they did appoint a number of Greeks to positions in Greece. And a U.S. ambassador said in one report that there were more Greeks from Lowell, Greek Americans from Lowell, in the CIA in Athens during the 1950s and 60s than from any other part of the United States. Mm-hmm. And they and some of the families that may hold the secrets as to what the Americans really knew about the junta takeover in advance.
Oh, okay.
They may hold the secrets.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. The families may hold it,
because
the people who were involved are probably deceased now.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's interesting. So Pappas and Watergate, how does that work out? How does that?
Pappas was the bag man. Pappas was working for the Republicans. He was the one making trips back and forth. And one Greek American friend who was a friend of Pappas told me that Pappas would talk to him about what he was doing.
The envelope.
The envelope, pockets, phakalakia.
The
little envelopes.
Yeah, the envelopes.
But he got, it was equivalent of millions of dollars, in today's dollars, millions of dollars of money from the junta to the Nixon campaign.
So you're telling me that foreign governments try to persuade American long before
2016 in Trump and Russia.
Russia. Yeah. So that, I'm sure there are other countries along the way have.
Oh, absolutely. They tried doing with Thomas Jefferson, with the French, but it didn't work out for Jefferson the first time because of it. But in elections over a period of time, there was a sense that American elections should be determined by Americans and not have foreign influence. And it really wasn't until the 1968 election where there was successful effort of a foreign government influencing an American election. And when you think about that election, it was the second closest election in the 20th century.
Yeah, it was.
It was the second
popular vote.
Popular vote and electoral vote. It was the second. And so,
if I remember, it was 100,000.
It was less than that.
Yeah, I do remember that. That was close. It's interesting. But I want to ask you this question. Also, Kissinger and Nixon administration knew about Greek plots. What kind of Greek plots?
Well, there were plots. The junta, when Elias was here fighting the junta, there were plots to have him kidnapped. They didn't care whether it was by submarine or plane or whatever it be. They wanted to get him back to Greece to torture and probably kill him. And Kissinger and others in the administration knew about these activities and looked the other way. There was a time when
Yeah, like I said earlier, they looked the other way in regards to the junta. Yeah. Publicly they came out against the junta, but in all actuality, they supported it.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was in 1970, Elias's father was dying, and he wanted to go back to Athens. The Greek government had stripped him of his citizenship, and he wanted to get a short pass. And he had gone to some members of the Senate for help. And he got a call on an early Saturday morning from Ted Kennedy saying, Elias, I know it's early. I'm sorry to call you. This is Ted Kennedy. I know my colleagues were trying to get you a pass. I'm telling you, I don't think if they give it to you, I don't think you should take it. And Elias said, Senator, are you saying it's a trap? And Kennedy said, I fear that if you go, you will never come back.
Oh.
And there were plots, and I found information later in affidavits signed by other diplomats that they were aware that there were plots to have Elias kidnapped and killed, and that in some cases they knew that Kissinger was well aware of these episodes.
What about Spiro Agnew, who was Greek-American? He was vice president.
He was vice president. Elias had an interesting relationship with Agnew. In 1966, he was introduced to him by his landlady, Louise Gore, who was a major fundraiser in Maryland when Agnew was running for governor of Maryland. And they had an amicable relationship then. In 67, when Elias came, he wanted Agnew to be supportive of the anti-junta efforts. And Agnew said, I'll be neutral. But then in 1968, when Elias learned about the money, he learned that Agnew was also involved with Pappas and the activities and the money coming to the United States. And he got very upset. And so they had a falling out after that. But Elias also regarded Agnew as a crypto-Greek. He was Episcopalian.
Yeah,
he couldn't speak Greek. He didn't give his kids Greek names. He preferred to be called Ted and not Spiro. He had only the rudimentary understanding of Greek history and culture. And he's a crypto-Greek. He also felt he was a crook. But
That's funny. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please.
Yeah, no. I mean, so he was also involved in this Pappas, Nixon administration, and Spiro Agnew.
Yeah, in fact, there was one point later, after Agnew resigned, that Elias and others tried to get Agnew to testify before the Senate about what he knew about the Greek money in the election. And John Tower, a Republican from Texas, blocked Agnew's appearance at the hearings to speak to the Senate about the issue.
I have a friend of mine read your book, right? And this is what he told me, and I want your response. He said, that Elias was an adversary by the U.S. Embassy in Athens, and that in places high in the U.S. government, which when you say high in U.S. government, you're talking about administration.
Right.
And you're talking about the Nixon administration at the time.
But Nixon administration, the Kennedy administration?
Yeah. So do you agree with that he was an adversary? He was an adversary to the U.S. Embassy in Athens?
Well, it depends. He was an adversary. He was an aggressive reporter who wanted to get information.
Right.
And to the extent getting that information meant stepping on toes.
Right.
He would step on toes, and he would upset. He became persona non grata for both the Greek and American governments because
that's exactly what this says. Yeah.
They didn't like his reporting because he was reporting the truth when they wanted to gild the truth.
Okay. What newspapers did Elias write for?
He worked for Kathamerini, he worked for Ethnos, he worked for the Athens Daily Post, and he worked for the Macedonian paper in Thessalonica.
Okay. Yeah, in Greece.
Oh, he also worked in the United States. He worked briefly for Time, the Herald Tribune, the papers there, and the CIA came and said, fire him, and they fired him. And there's a whole other story in the book detailing how he got his job back with the Herald Tribune.
We're talking about the Greek connection, and James Barron is here. The problem, it wasn't a bestseller because it came out during COVID, and that's what's happening, right?
Yeah, I learned a wonderful French expression called succès d'estime. Succès d'estime is something where it receives widespread critical acclaim, which the book has received, but does not become a bestseller.
Oh, right.
But interestingly, he was holding up the autographed copy. Lala Books, which is a wonderful bookstore you have here in Lowell, has autographed copies.
Yeah, they do. They do. Another question. The Athens News and the Athens Post. Athens News was an English-speaking paper in Athens, and the Athens Post. I don't remember which one was CIA-backed, but one of the papers was CIA-backed. It was a daily newspaper. You could go downtown Athens, go to one of the kiosks and ask them for the Athens Post and the Athens News.
Well, the interesting thing, I don't know about the Athens News. The Athens Daily Post was one that Elias helped form.
Okay.
But during the Hunter
Well, it
years,
must be the news then.
But during the Hunter years, there was when Elias was going to escape in the whole fight regarding coverage, he had a split with the person who was running the paper with him, and the person who was running the paper ended up going toward the junta, and Elias left the paper entirely. So that may well be in the Post afterwards.
I see. No, they were two separate papers.
Right. The Athens News, but Athens News then was a resource. Elias would give tips to the editor of the Athens News from Washington against the junta during that period.
Yeah, and the other English-speaking paper was, I think it was, what was it? The Herald American.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
But that was a European-type paper.
And Elias ended up writing for that.
Oh, he did. Oh, yeah, that's right. He did. I remember that. Okay. I'm just recall, right? So, what lessons have we learned from the Greek connection? I mean, what lessons should we take from
There are a variety of things. One, we learn that history is malleable, that it changes as you get new information and attitudes change. It's also that democracy is fragile, and that the democratic norms can buckle under authoritarian pressures, whether you're talking about Greece, whether you're talking about the United States. Also, claims of fake news are not new. There have always been reactions against certain aggressive news gathering operations, and when they report the truth that's uncomfortable to people in power. I think also that fame is fleeting. Some of the names that are in the book that were very famous and popular then, we don't even know the names today.
I know, that's true.
But I think in terms of Elias, the idea is that one person can make a difference, whether it's a whistleblower or whether it's as an aggressive activist. But doing so requires a great deal of courage. It's a risk to your career, to your family, and in Elias' case, even to life itself.
Was he married?
He was married briefly, and the oppressive, which is a whole other story regarding his wife, but the pressures of spying on Elias and the pressures on him drove his wife, who was very fragile at the time based on some of her earlier experiences, to get a divorce and come back to the United States.
She was an American.
Yeah.
So is that how he got American passport through her?
He never had. And remember, he got a green card during when he escaped the junta.
Okay.
He was stripped from his citizenship.
Yeah, right.
And he then ended up getting a green card.
I see,
and he
okay.
always had that. And he ended up getting his citizenship restored. And in fact, in 2008,
his Greek citizenship
restored. Yeah. And in 2008, he was honored by the Greek government with the Order of the Phoenix.
Wow.
For his heroic fight to preserve democracy in Greece.
Wow, good for him. The other question I have is, how is Karamanlis, the prime minister, involved in this? He was overthrown, isn't that, by the junta?
Yeah, it was Papandreou who was overthrown, and it was a series. It was Karamanlis, then George Papandreou, and it was then a series of interim prime ministers, and then the junta, but Elias had interesting relations with Karamanlis because Karamanlis, at a 4th of July celebration at the American embassy, comes in and sees Elias talking to some people, goes up to him, grabs him by the lapels and tears his suit and says, is angry at him for what his reporting was done. And in the cables I saw from the American embassy, they said it was an embarrassing episode, but Democratopoulos was right in what he had reported, but Karamanlis didn't like the reporting.
Right.
But later, during the junta years, Elias would fly to Paris and meet with Karamanlis in Paris, working with other Greeks, was how they could overthrow the junta, and then was in fact worked with Karamanlis when he came back. Efforts to come back to become prime minister, and then even worked with Papandreou afterward.
This is the Greek connection is about post-World War II history, basically. That's what I see. Do you see a movie in this? I mean, is there a movie or TV show? Or tell me what's happening.
Interesting thing. When Governor Michael Dukakis finished the book, he called me one Saturday morning and said, "This book is great. It should be made a motion picture. Let me see what I can do to help. Whatever I can do to help, I want to help." Doris Kearns Goodwin said, "This book sets up as a mini-series. With each stage, it really goes from World War II, or it was just before World War II, all the way through the Cold War, with different key episodes of his life." And it is different people have talked about different things, the miniseries or movie. Leslie Epstein, Theo Epstein's father, who had been head of the creative writing program at BU. Leslie said, forget about a movie, forget about miniseries. This should be a multi-year series that is like a movie done in France called A French Village, that looks at a village from all different characters, and this should be the equivalent for Greece, looking at it from World War II through the Greek Civil War and parts of the Cold War and the Junta years and all of this, with Elias as the main character and having other characters. The interesting variation on that was I had somebody contact me from a music professor from Connecticut who said there were so many wow moments in this book, I would like to create this as a musical and stage it in my college workshop and invite New York investors to do it as an off-Broadway production. Can you send me a libretto that I can work from? And I said, I don't have librettos, but I posted something for people with librettos, and I heard from a woman in London who said, I'd like to try to do a libretto for a musical.
Wow.
And I heard from somebody in San Francisco who said, this is a fascinating story. I don't see it as a musical. I see it as an opera. Let me see what I can do.
Wow.
So at this point, I have no idea what's going to happen. One of my challenges is that I did this book without an agent, so I negotiated my contract, so I don't have somebody in Hollywood representing me. So I have different friends in Greece, in California, elsewhere, who are trying in different ways to move it forward. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, can you hire an agent, or you don't?
If there were an agent to be there who is good, different people have offered different things. I'll see what we're able to put together.
You didn't mention King Constantine. He was overthrown when the junta came. He was kicked out of the country. You didn't mention him. Is there anything in the book about?
There are good parts of that. The parts in terms of Elias's relationship with his mother, Queen Frederica, and all kinds of issues with her and different intrigue. In fact, some of her sex activities with the CIA is a whole other episode that some readers might be interested in. But King Constantine was one that Elias was not supportive of during a time as a royal, really based on Elias's Republican sensibilities. But Elias also worked with King Constantine, flying to Rome and meeting with him. He worked with all kinds of resistance groups to try to overthrow the junta.
How was the junta overthrown in the end?
The junta was overthrown in the end because of its overreaching in Turkey and trying to deal with get rid of Archbishop Makarios on Cyprus. And basically its move on Cyprus animated the Turks to come in and basically destroy much of the Greek forces that were there and to divide the island, which is divided to this day.
Right.
But the fights back and forth on that, and there's a whole other section there dealing with Kissinger's role in that readers might be interested in.
Yeah. So what happened in regards to Cyprus, the Turks attacked Cyprus, took half of Cyprus. The Greek Cypriots have the other half, and that's the way it is today. And that was in 1974. So we're talking about quite a few years ago.
It's less than half that the Turks have, but it's still a significant half.
Right. So I guess they're still trying to kick out the Turks from Cyprus, but I don't see that coming down the turnpike. Listen, I mean, I thank you for writing The Greek Connection. It's very interesting. I thank you for coming here. I appreciate that, too. I mean, it's a great book, and people should read it and pick it up. And La Books, again, we had them up on the show. Go down there or call them up and ask them to hold the Greek Connection. And you don't have to be Greek American. You could read this book in regards to the history of a small country
Yeah, and if you want more information on the book with reviews and other things, there was a website that's The Greek Connection, and add the word book, thegreekconnectionbook.com, for more information about the book.
Cool. James, thank you for being on the show. I appreciate it very much.